The fire crackles softly in the center of the caravanserai courtyard as the last light fades from the desert sky. My name is Ahmad ibn Rashid, and I have traveled these Silk Road routes for 43 years now, longer than many of you have been alive. Tonight the stars begin to appear one by one above these ancient walls, the same stars that have guided merchants for 1,000 years before me. The camels rest in the stables below, their day's work done, and the other travellers have retreated to their rooms, leaving just us here by this fire. Let me tell you about the people I have met on these roads, the stories that have stayed with me through decades of travel, because the Silk Road is not just about silk and spices and jade, it is about human lives crossing paths in the vastness between worlds. 40 years ago, I met a merchant named Change from the Middle Kingdom, far to the east beyond the Taklamakan Desert. We met in Samarkand when the city's blue domes shone brilliant in the spring sunlight, and the gardens bloomed with flowers that seemed to come from paradise itself. He was quiet, this man, observing everything, watching people in the marketplace with eyes that seemed to read their souls. We became travelling companions because the Silk Road is dangerous for a solitary merchant. Bandits and sandstorms and wild animals make the journey treacherous, but together we felt safer, stronger. For 3 months we travelled through the burning desert, past oasis cities like Kashgar and Turpan, through heat so merciless that our lips cracked and bled. One night in a small caravanserai near the ruins of an ancient city, when the stars seemed close enough to touch, Cheng told me about his daughter. Mei-Ling was her name, 14 years old, born sickly when doctors said she would not survive her first year, but she did survive. She grew delicate, but strong in spirit. When she turned 12, she began coughing blood, and Cheng heard stories of a physician in Persia who knew medicines unknown in the East, herbs and treatments that could perform miracles, so Cheng gathered everything valuable he owned, bought jade from other merchants, borrowed from family, invested everything imperial jade pieces. His plan was to travel the Silk Road, trade jade for gold, reach Persia, find the physician, bring the medicine home to save his daughter's life. When I asked how long he had been travelling, he said 2 years and 4 months, 2 years away from a dying child, and I had no words for such sacrifice, no comfort adequate for a man whose heart walked 1,000 miles away from his body. We reached Isfahan together, the city of turquoise domes and bridges across the river, and found the physician, an old man bent with age, but with sharp alert eyes. He listened to Chain's description of the symptoms, asked many questions, then went to his shelves of jars and bottles and powders and dried leaves, mixing things I had never seen, roots from distant mountains and flowers that bloomed once every 10 years. The physician said this might help, but made no promises because the lungs are delicate and life is fragile. Chain paid him with his finest jade piece, a stone the colour of spring leaves after rain, worth more than most men earn in a lifetime. When we finally approached the borders of the Middle Kingdom, Chang could barely contain himself, waking before dawn and pacing with urgency. The last night before we parted ways, he going north to his province and me heading west, he thanked me for walking the road with him, and I asked if he would send word about Mei-Ling. 6 months later in Bukhara, a merchant from the east found me in the bazaar carrying a small package. Inside was a letter and a jade pendant carved in the shape of a plum blossom. The letter was short. It said, "Mei-Ling lives. The medicine worked. She grows stronger each day." She asked about the Silk Road and about the uncle who helped her father cross the desert. This pendant she carved herself as she learns the craft. I still have that pendant after all these years. I have sold silk and spices and perfumes and ceramics, everything a merchant trades. But that jade plum blossom I will never sell because sometimes the Silk Road gives you profit. Sometimes it gives you stories, and sometimes it gives you reminders of why we endure the dust and the distance. Every night he wrote long letters, and when I asked who he wrote to, he said his wife Anahit, married only 3 months before he left on this trading journey, still in that blessed time when everything about your beloved is new. He wrote to her every night and sent the letters with merchants heading west, so she would know he was thinking of her, that she was with him even on the long road. As weeks passed, I continued encountering Dawood in various cities along the route, and noticed he was always asking merchants if they had come from Tabriz, if they brought any letters for Dawood, the Armenian merchant, always hope in his voice and always hope in his voice. When they said no, 6 months into his journey when we met again in Samarkand, I asked if he had received any letters from Anahit and his face crumpled. "Not one letter in 6 months," he said, pulling out his collection of dozens of letters he had written and sent. He asked if he was forgotten already, if she no longer thought of him, if he had become a ghost to her in just half a year. The Silk Road is unpredictable, letters go missing, merchants get robbed, routes change, caravans sink in sandstorms, but there was also the possibility he did not want to speak aloud, that she had forgotten or moved on. David became quieter after that, still writing his letters every night, but now with desperation, as if the writing itself was the only thread connecting him to home. We travelled together another month through autumn, as nights grew colder and roads harder. Then in Bukhara, everything changed. We were in the marketplace, and suddenly I heard David shouting in excitement, running through the crowded bazaar, pushing past people with his face transformed. He had seen an Armenian merchant, an old man with a caravan just arrived from the west. I followed and watched as David spoke rapidly in Armenian, and the old merchant nodded and smiled and reached into his bags and pulled out a bundle, dozens of letters tied with a blue ribbon. I have seen men receive gold and discover valuable treasures, and fathers reunited with children, but I have never seen joy like I saw in David's face in that moment. His hands shook as he took the letters, and he sat right there in the dusty marketplace and began reading, and I left him alone because some moments are too sacred for witnesses. The first letters were newlywed sweetness, small details of daily life. The garden, her mother's health, the cat that came to their door. Then gradually worry crept in. Why do you not write? Have my letters not reached you? Then confusion and pain. Have you forgotten me, husband? Does the road take you away from love? By letter 20, there was heartbreak. I walked to the marketplace every day asking merchants for word of you. They say you live and trade, but you do not write. My heart breaks to viewed. Have I lost you to the distance? I have decided to believe, she wrote. I will believe you still love me. I will believe your letters are lost. Not your heart. I will write every week, whether you respond or not. This is my faith. You are worth waiting for. And she did, for 18 more weeks. She wrote even in doubt and pain. The last letter, number 43, dated just 3 weeks before the merchant left Tabriz, said, my beloved David, spring comes again. The pomegranates bloom in our garden. I sit beneath them and imagine you seeing beautiful things on the Silk Road. I imagine you seeing beautiful things on the Silk Road. I imagine you tasting strange foods and hearing languages. I will never know. I am proud of you. I am waiting for you. David left the next morning, sold all his remaining carpets quickly at lower prices than he should have accepted because he did not care. He took the old Armenian merchant's route back, the dangerous one through the mountains, and I never saw him again. But 5 years later, I was in Tabriz trading silk and I asked about an Armenian carpet merchant named David, and a shopkeeper smiled and pointed down the street to a prosperous shop. I found the shop, and inside was David, older now with grey, starting in his beard. Older now with grey, starting in his beard, modernizing carpets, clearly his wife, clearly Anna Hitt. When David saw me, his face broke into a smile of recognition, and he embraced me like a brother, introduced me to Anna Hitt, who thanked me for travelling with her husband during that difficult time, for being a companion on the lonely road. That was 15 years ago, and I still think of them when I pass through Tabriz, how they chose to believe when doubt seemed more reasonable, how they kept writing into silence hoping their words would eventually reach their destination. The Silk Road teaches many lessons, but perhaps the most important is this, that distance cannot destroy what is real, that faith can survive the vast empty spaces between hearts, that love is sometimes just the act of continuing to reach out, even when you receive nothing back but your own echo. I met a merchant named Ibrahim in Damascus 30 years ago. He traded in frankincense and myrrh, the sacred resins that burn in temples and churches across the world. Ibrahim was from Yemen originally, from the land where frankincense trees grow on mountainsides in harsh conditions, trees that bleed their precious sap only when wounded. He told me that frankincense is like people. It gives its best when it has been cut. When it has suffered, the scars produce the treasure. Ibrahim had lost his first wife to fever when she was young, barely 25, leaving him with 3 small children to raise alone. For years he traded locally, never venturing far from home because the children needed him. But as they grew older and could care for themselves, he felt the pull of the Silk Road, the desire to see what lay beyond his familiar mountains. His eldest son was 19 when Ibrahim left on his first long trading journey, old enough to manage the family business, responsible and capable. Ibrahim trusted him completely, perhaps too completely, because trust can sometimes blind us to human weakness. The journey took Ibrahim north through Abraham into Syria, and then east toward Persia, trading his frankincense for silk and spices and jade, multiplying his investment with each transaction. He was gone for 14 months, a successful journey, and when he returned home to Yemen, he found his house still standing, his younger children healthy, but his eldest son missing. The neighbors told Ibrahim what had happened with voices full of pity and shame. The son had fallen in love with a merchant's daughter from another clan, a forbidden match because of old family feuds, blood disputes from generations past that nobody could even properly explain anymore, but which still governed who could marry whom. The son had taken money from the family business, a substantial amount, and fled with the girl into the desert, heading toward Egypt where they hoped to start a new life, where old feuds meant nothing. Ibrahim's first reaction was rage. His son had stolen from him, betrayed his trust, abandoned his younger siblings, disgraced the family name. The neighbors expected Ibrahim to curse his son, to declare him dead, to wipe his name from the family. This is what tradition demanded. He closed his business temporarily, left his younger children with his sister, and set out to find his son. Not to punish him, not to drag him back in chains, but simply to find him and understand. It took Ibrahim 6 months of searching, following rumors and whispers across trade routes, asking about a young couple traveling together, Yemeni features, possibly heading to Egypt. He found them finally in Alexandria, living in a small room near the docks, the son working as a porter, hauling cargo from ships, the girl sewing clothes for merchant families, both of them thin and worn but still together, still choosing each other despite the hardship. When the son saw his father standing in the doorway of their room, he fell to his knees, expecting. Instead, Ibrahim sat down on the floor and asked to meet his daughter-in-law properly, asked her name, her story, who she was beyond the feuds and the forbidden. Her name was Layla, and she spoke quietly but with dignity about her family, about how she had loved Ibrahim's son since childhood, about how they had tried to do things properly, to ask permission, to follow tradition. But both families had refused, threatened violence, left them no choice but to run. Ibrahim listened, really listened, and saw not criminals or traitors but 2 young people trying to build a life against impossible odds. He stayed in Alexandria for 3 days, met with his son and daughter-in-law each day, talked about the family business, about possibilities. On the 3rd day, he made an offer. Come back home. Both of you. I will speak to Layla's family. I will use my influence as a respected merchant. I will end this stupid feud that serves no purpose except to perpetuate old pain. If they refuse, if they remain stubborn, then you can return to Alexandria and I will support you here. I will invest in a proper business for you, but at least try to come home first. The son wept. Layla wept. Ibrahim remained steady, though his own heart was breaking at how close he had come to losing his child forever over pride and tradition. They returned to Yemen together, and Ibrahim did exactly as he promised. He went to Layla's family, important merchants in their own right, and he spoke not of honor or tradition, but of economics and sense. Our children love each other, he said. They will marry regardless of our permission. The question is whether we participate in their lives or whether we drive them away and lose them both. These feuds were started by people long dead over disputes nobody remembers. Why should the living continue to bleed for ghosts? It took time, many conversations, mediation by respected elders, but eventually Layla's family agreed. The marriage was formalized, blessed properly, and Ibrahim's son and new daughter-in-law began working in the family business together. When I met Ibrahim in Damascus 3 years after all of this, he told me the story with quiet pride. His son had become one of his most trusted partners, his daughter-in-law had proven herself shrewd in negotiations, and they had just given him his first grandchild. The money his son had stolen, Ibrahim had forgiven as a wedding gift, turned the theft into a dowry, transformed shame into celebration. I asked Ibrahim why he had chosen mercy over honor, forgiveness over tradition, and he said something I have never forgotten. Frankincense trees give their treasure only when wounded. But people are not trees. We have a choice. We can allow our wounds to produce either poison. We have a choice. We can allow our wounds to produce either poison or perfume, either bitterness or grace. And I chose grace because I wanted my son back more than I wanted revenge. The Silk Road is full of men who have lost their families to pride, Ibrahim said. Men who chose honor over love, tradition over mercy. And they end their lives wealthy, perhaps, but alone. And what profit is there in that? I've carried Ibrahim's words with me for 30 years. Through my own failures and choices, through moments when pride tempted me to become rigid, when tradition whispered that I should value face over relationship. The frankincense merchant taught me that the most valuable trade on the Silk Road is not in goods, but in grace, not in enforcing old rules, but in having the courage to write new ones when the old ones produce only suffering. In the city of Kashgar, I once met a translator named Yusuf who spoke 7 languages. Arabic and Persian and Turkish and Chinese and Mongolian and Sogdian, and even some Greek. He was indispensable in the marketplace where merchants from every corner of the world converged, where a Persian needed to negotiate with a Chinese merchant through multiple layers of translation, where misunderstanding could cost a fortune or start a conflict. Yusuf was perhaps 50 years old when I knew him, his beard more grey than black, his eyed from decades of mediating between languages. He told me once over tea that translation is not about words but about worlds, that every language carries within it an entire way of seeing reality, and the translator's job is to build bridges between these different realities, to find the places where they connect. I asked Yusuf how he learned so many languages, and he said necessity first, survival, because Kashgar sits at the crossroads of empires, and if you want to eat you must speak to everyone paella. But beyond necessity came curiosity, the desire to understand how different people think, how they perceive time and honor and God. In Chinese, he explained, there are different words for older brother and younger brother. In younger brother, you can hard say brother without specifying the birth adequate. But hierarchy is built into the language itself, into how they see family relationships. In Arabic, we have dozens of words for different types of love, spiritual love and romantic love, and familial love and love of God, each with its own word, its own texture. In Mongolian, they have many words for different types of horses because horses are central to their world. Yusuf told me about the hardest translation he ever had to do, and it was not a commercial negotiation or a diplomatic document, it was a love letter. A Chinese merchant had fallen in love with a Persian woman he met in the Kashgar marketplace, the daughter of a carpet seller, and he wanted to express his feelings but could not speak Persian well enough to convey the depth of his emotion. He came to Yusuf with a letter written in Chinese, beautiful classical poetry, allusions to ancient love stories involving jade and moonlight and eternal devotion. Translate this. The merchant said my heart. Yusuf read the letter and moonlight and eternal. Translate them with this. That a must make in the Chinese letter was full of indirect expression, subtle hints, poetic allusions that would mean everything to a Chinese reader, but nothing to a Chinese reader, but nothing to a Persian one. Persian love poetry has its own traditions, its own metaphors, references to roses and nightingales and Sufi mysticism, completely different imagery, completely different emotional registers. If Yusuf translated the Chinese letter literally into Persian, incomprehensible, the woman would not understand she was being loved, she would simply be confused. So Yusuf made a choice, incomprehensible, the woman would not understand she was being loved, he would not then translate. He took the Chinese merchant's feelings and rewrote them in Persian love poetry tradition, using Persian muffabos and Persian emotional cadences, making it feel like something a Persian lover would write to his beloved. The letter he gave to the merchant to deliver was barely related word for word. The letter he gave to the merchant to deliver was barely related word for word to the original, but it was absolutely faithful to the heart behind the words. The Persian woman received the letter and was deeply moved. She responded with her own letter, which Yusuf then translated into Chinese using Chinese poetic conventions, that led eventually to marriage. Yusuf attended the wedding, watched the Chinese merchant and Persian bride exchange vows in a ceremony that blended both traditions, knowing that he had been the invisible architect of their connection, that their love existed partly because he had known how to make their hearts intelligible to each other across the vast difference of language and culture. But Yusuf carried a sorrow too, a weight that came from spending his life between worlds, never fully belonging to any single one. He told me that translators live in a strange exile, fluent in many languages, but known anymore, able to move between enile, able to hold of tough, you all of them. When I speak Chinese, Yusuf said, the Chinese hear my Persian accent and see me as foreign. When I speak Persian, Persians hear the influence of other languages in my phrasing and think me strange. I am everywhere a guest and nowhere truly home. I asked if he regretted a moat, do snow, 3 home. I asked if he regretted his life, regretted becoming a man of 7 languages, and he said no, the loneliness is real, but so is the privilege. I get to see connections others miss. I understand that beneath the different words all humans are asking, they're seeking the same things, love and meaning and safety and belonging. We just have different sounds, we nights, sig foin. Yusuf died 3 years after I met him, collapsed in the Kashgar marketplace while translating a debisit. He participated a Mongol trader and an Arab merchant. His last act on earth was building a bridge between 2 men who could not understand each other, and that seems fitting somehow, that he died doing what he lived for. They buried him in Kashgar, and merchants from every culture attended his funeral, Chinese and Persian, Chinese and Persian, Chinese and Persian, and Mongol, all gathered around his grave, each speaking prayers in their own nightique, creating together a multilingual chorus of farewell. It had felt you to mine, the lesson I took from Yusuf is that communicating with the sinner for the poor, the bread a compoit, they return the old fen. Av modity time we reach cross the gap of range the quantitative of language or culture or court experience. We're performing a small sacred act. We are saying you matter enough for me to learn your world, to see through your eyes, to speak words that will land softly in your particular heart. In the city of Bukhara I met a physician named Hakim, a man who treated everyone regardless of their ability to pay, whether they were wealthy merchants or street beggars, or stint was near nat nakai, emastid torig. Idismum with where rides, Rudigabrisdurchus. Hakim was behapuk 40 years old, trained in the porting coverton. Averaging photo commonats, team with them adibani the maiders, Wadibane Kember and the Drivite. I came to Hamterhivet, fribble either of a fever I'd caught, probably from bad water somewhere along the road or them on the road, my body burning and shaking, convinced of I believe for committal of feverlby. I'd caught for body from bad water somewhere along the road, my body burning and shaking, convinced I was going to die in this foreign city far from home. Hakim examined me, felt my pulse, looked at my tongue, asked about my bowel movements in my dreams, all the direct questions of his tradition. Then he bet me big meat quarterly. I asked how much I owed him, and he waved his hand as timid. Pay what might pulled them. War and fizzy also the wonderland. And the one sound of re from might. I am not rut of thee 3 days as I recovered him from of there. I burnt a room I learnt more about Hakim from other mother merchants who knew him. He came from a wealthy family in Baghdad originally, studied medicine at the House of Wisdom, was brilliant, destined for a prestigious career as physician to caliphs and sultans. But something happened during his training in Baghdad, when a poor woman brought her sick child to the clinic. A little boy, birthy old both mind, Fikrit 5. Word Beneket, when she begged him to treat her son anyway, to shusha mercy with Tamitha Kifidhium. But at this is a dividend, porto demate, with time to the rave feed of incurbe kubitsels, the winnivad vigul, look of reef and grass upon it. The woman left weeping, and Hakim followed her into the street, brought her back to the clinic after the senior physician had left, treated the child himself using medications he stole from the clinic's supplies. But he was too late. The child himself using medications he stole from the clinic's supplies. But he was too late. The child had already been sick for many days. The mother had gone to other physicians first, who had all turned all day, and the diet Mycony. That Ixurian broke something in Hakim, in rebuilt him to demic covenant, the Havadi body and Abade beacon. Before the Bukamat and the board the Barrave, Dripafel was buried at the end. Then one would have endeavoured antibody to parapet. Rich merchants could pay generously, and their payments subsidised treatment for the poor, but everyone received the same quality of care. Rich merchants could pay generously, and their payments subsidised treatment for the poor, but everyone received the same quality of care, the same attention, the same medicine. Hakim told me all this on my 3rd day when the fever broke exactly as he expected, and I returned to clinic fit. This will Bimot meet him. This art thanker which debate. Would it yad what it did debate? I asked Hakim if he ever regretted his choice, giving up a prestigious career in Baghdad with his humble clinic in Bapunik in Bukhara, treating people who could never adequately repay him. He looked at me with eyes that had seen much suffering and said, in Baghdad I was becoming a successful physician, here in Bukhara I became healer. There is a difference. A physician treats diseases, here he treats people. A physician gets paid for his knowledge. A healer is enriched by his paid for his knowledge. A healer is a difference. A physician treats diseases. A healer treats people. A physician gets paid for his knowledge. A healer is enriched by his service. I am wealthy at Mike of hard bride. I've forgetted all that you travel dangerous roads, he said. Fevers and illnesses are common. Take this with you. And when you meet someone sick who cannot afford a physician, make them the tea. Teach them how to use it. I have carried that bag of herbs and Hakim's instructions across thousands of miles since then. And yes, I have used them several times for a young merchant burning with fever in Samarkand, for a caravanserai keeper's daughter sick with infection, for a fellow traveller shaking with jawter sick with infection, for a fellow traveller shaking with jills in the desert night. Each time I make that bitter tea and watch someone's fever break, I think of Hakim, how his healing multiplies itself across the Silk Road, through people like me who carry his knowledge and his generosity forward. How one man's decision to value service over prestige creates ripples that extend far beyond his own lifetime or reach. I met a woman in Samarkand named Zara, who ran a small inn for female travellers, a rare thing on the Silk Road where women travelling alone or in small groups face dangers and suspicions from a world designed for men. Zara's inn was a safe space, a place where women could sleep without fear, where they could talk freely about their lives and journeys without male interference or judgment. Zara herself was perhaps 60 years old when I knew her. Her face creased with lines that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Her manner, direct and unsentimental, but fundamentally kind. I learned about her because a merchant I travelled with had a sister joining his caravan, coming from Persia to meet him in Samarkand before they continued east together, and he asked around for a safe place where she could stay while waiting for him to complete his business in the city. Zara's inn was recommended by multiple sources, so he brought his sister there and I accompanied them to ensure she was properly settled. The inn was recommended by multiple sources, so he brought his sister there and I accompanied them to ensure she was properly settled. The inn was modest, clean, organised around a central courtyard with a fountain, rooms opening onto the courtyard, everything visible to every other reason. A dozen women were staying there when we arrived, merchants and pilgrims and travellers of every age, and they moved through the space with a relaxed confidence you rarely saw in public caravanserais where women were always guarded, always watchful. Zara interviewed the sister, asked where she came from, where she was going, why she travelled, not nosily but protectively, making sure this was genuinely a woman in need of shelter and not some elaborate ruse. Satisfied, she quoted a price that was more than fair, showed the sister to a room, and then turned to the merchant brother with a fierce expression. You would sitta during diet, often more there. At the water that come about, after mother brought of was a demate with a ramit of vash to relic, out of further mother freiken timid. The Vaberbathan, the patats, other are aligned. This is a space for women only. Do you understand? The merchant agreed quickly, intimidated by Zara's intensity, and we left. Fiat Vatat, who could be sister, would be safe. And I said yes, safer, probably than anywhere else in the city, because Zara has made this her life. Kicho, den married young, barely 14, to an Oderbert de code, de Martich hout, hard the trout. It tried. Ted, had to the very night, but a dritcher could to be the kida. But I mades them come to fiddick. But I'm skinny that one out, fit it into trade a bit. I'd be one befriend, I did some, the Vitican Queen's Prades. Something happened for that was Chevron never suffered. Something happened that Zara never spoke about directly, but which broke her marriage beyond repair. Some said her husband's brother had assaulted her and had fallen in love with another man. Some said she had simply decided she would not live her life waiting for a husband who was never home. Whatever the truth, when her husband returned after 14 months away, Zara asked for a did, broad force, that's bird, but a scander out, but I tried timber fade. What put out to feed the bat, she wanted duck at a mitter. One met him pretty pinched at lit and then he been. For had Ronnie bees, the verday can trizikrum, but at the end. The Radampadra husband had neglected his duties to provide for his family, that his long absences constituted abandonment under Islamic law. The judge, impressed by her knowledge and courage, granted the divorce, but freedom came at a terrible price. Her husband, enraged, took their son away, declared that Zara would never see him again, and legally he had that right. Zara kept her daughter, but lost her son. Areen rutut, it falled, and former Christ the troke. In Puyu, for several years Zara struggled, taking whatever work come to midlife, caning, seeking anything to feed of Peter the Bashan, on her meadow doth about and opera bicken. But she noticed something during those 5. The widows and the women on the margins, the widows and divorces and travellers who had no safe place in a travellers who had no safe place in a world, organised around male protection and male control. And she had an idea. She used every coin she had saved, borrowed from the few people who still trusted her, and bought a small failing inn near the marketplace. She turned it into a space exclusively for women, with rules designed to attire ace. No but out. Women who needed temporary refuge were given reduced rates or sometimes housed for free. Women who were fleeing dangerous to Eurasia were caught and hidden were hunted. The inn became known across the Silk Road networks as a sanctuary, a place where a woman travelling alone could sleep without fear, where she could hear stories from other women about routes and dangers and opportunities, where the knowledge women accumulated through their own travelling experiences was shared and preserved. Zara's daughter grew up in the inn, learning her mother's business, and by the time I met them the daughter was managing much of the daily operations while Zara handled the difficult cases. The women who arrived or pregnant and desperate, I asked her want her to breeded. When I've any tillerweed, Verbist mate if footing cut the raven, by the mini bit of ficamites shermid and fermade of a cade for son, the fipamant of a figlet. Answered Benifreed at Fidi Preeds, thou art that Ritu Vordi his old, married with child, a David oven of his own for to beach on of his own. His father raised him to see me as a shameful woman who abandoned her durded. Pibizid beblitz, Vidavate sight chest to sofa. My son thinks I chose myself over him, but I chose survival, I chose life, and I hope one day he understands that a mother who models courage and independence gives her children a gift even if they do not recognize it at the time. Zara died 4 years after I met her, and her daughter took over the inn. maintaining all of her mother's principles. When I pass through Samarkand now, I sometimes stop by the inn, which has expanded to twice its original size, and I see young women working there who remind me of Zara, fierce and protected to twice its original size, and I see young women working there who remind me of Sarah, fierce to quarter to kenta comatus scub. The lesson Zara taught me is that sometimes the most radical act is simply creating a space where different rules apply, where the normal hierarchies and dangers are suspended, where people who are usually vulnerable can rest and breathe and be themselves without fear. Revolution does not always look like armies and battles. Sometimes it looks like an inn run by a divorced woman who decided that women deserved places where they could sleep in peace. In Kashgar, I met a young man named Timur who was apprenticed to a master carpet weaver, with learning the intricate art of knotting silk threads into patterns that told stories and captured light. Timur was perhaps 17, from a small village in the Fergana Valley, sent to Kashgar by his family because the master weaver in the Fergana Valley, sent to Kashgar by his family because the master weaver there, a man named Rashid, was legendary for his skill and knowledge. I met Timur in the marketplace where he was buying silk threads for his master. We Timur the seriousness of someone who did earn the quality of the final work. He seemed overwhelmed by the city, by the crowds and the noise and the thousand of a decision, Tom for the tenant Windadamantinaseven, Brunting would abemot round enough idro town. Brabant following weeks, as I concluded my business in Kashgar, I became friendly with Timur at Mbisan's twos Risi, visiting their workshop to Verkamp, fascinated by the patience required, visiting their workshop to watch them work, fascinated by the patience required, the way a carpet emerges one tiny knot at a time, thousands and individual decisions accumulating slowly into a coherent whole. Rasid Wong is bind, my day sand, by his mirzvind. Timur watched his master with devotion and frustration in equal measure. In protime in equal measure, the Vergeinter became Dime Prostemius, frustrated because he could not understand how to replicate what Rashid did so effortlessly. He smiled and gestured for me to sit beside him at the loom. "Look at this pattern," he said, running his fingers across the work in progress. "It is a traditional medallion design. Very classical. You have seen 1,000 carpets with this same basic composition. The difference between a living carpet and a dead one is not in the pattern itself, but in the 10,000 tiny choices made within the pattern, where to vary the color by one shade, where to break symmetry slightly to create tension, where to veer to beric imperfectum that makes the eye pause and question. The perfect carpet is dead, because life is not even demi-cortive. In Felixabadable of Tumit, one African punaltin. Furits B. Kamit, but Damadid Braffen, one Ardabi Waitumt, but event. And Tamadivam Fudder's body embedded in the work so naturally that the viewer does not consciously notice them but responds to them emotionally. It's like music. Rashid continued. The notes are written, but the feeling comes from the tiny variations in timing and emphasis, the places where the musician pushes slightly or pulls, slightly back, where the volume swayed to modeseta. But the podival worried. I should a pod on neat. I'd weave the moat at Badavate on the modi. Like that wow over the dart, that our right night. That at a double of divided, Timur objected. But master, how can anyone learn like at the peak can become an itinogation? It seems like Stuxan. It seems like magic, not craft. Rashid laughed. Not magic, just life. You learn it by living, by paying attention, by letting your experience flow through your work instead of trying to control everything. You are young and you want rules. You want techniques you can master and reproduce, but the final level of mastery is learning when to break the rules, when to let quite timter. But the final level of mastery is learning when to break the rules, when to let not quite time. With not great, to great. The not right, meet. I asked Rashid how long it took him to reach this level, and he said 40 years and 40. Hos diotie weavy ride. Our southern porty braids and time not the northern man, and slowly beginning to understand what makes a pattern breathe. And I am still learning, he added. I think I will be learning until the day I die. There is no end to the depth of this art. No point at which you know everything. You just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper is art. No point at which you know everything. You just keep going deeper into the mystery of how human hands can transform simple material that outlives the maker. Timur asked, who will make what? My carpets will survive me, he said. They are scattered across the world now, in palaces and homes and markets, and they will teach what I know to anyone who looks carefully, who studies them with attention and love. You, Timur, you are learning, maybe not as fast as you wish, maybe not by the direct transmission you desire, but you are absorbing through proximity, through watching, through your own struggles at the loom. When I am gone, you will continue weaving, and you will find my lessons appearing in your work. Things you did not know you had learned will surface at the right moments. And that is how knowledge passes from generation to generation, not entirely through explicit teaching, but through presence, through working side by side, through a kind of osmosis that happens when a student opens themselves to a master's way of being. This is from my first martyr work, he said. The first carpet where I felt I had broken through to something real. I cut this piece from the corner before selling the carpet 40 years ago. I have kept it as a reminder of that moment of discovery. I want you to have it now. I carried it with you on the Silk Road. And when you look at it, remember that moment of discovery. I want you to have it now. Carry it with you on the Silk Road. And when you look at it, remember that mastery is not about perfection. It is about honesty, about nosti, about nisting, about perfection. It is about honesty. Ibahib carried over your. You will never see I carried over Thuta. You will never see Avkaka had more carvia bear that vigietus. When I look at its colours and patterns, I think about Rashid of Prusins, gnarled fingers maitus vitamadlarad. Fingers are a thing that fids. I've added into Fidots Befrika's devotion. About the way knowledge lives in bodies and hands and gets passed imperfectly but genuinely from one generation to the next. The lesson is that real learning is mysterious, that you cannot force understanding, cannot rush mastery. You can only show up every day and do the work and trust that gradually, through patience and attention, the depths will reveal themselves. In the city of Turpan I witnessed something that changed how I understood justice and mercy. There was a tet the fitted for taste. Where a droid tie, the thief was caught quickly. A young man, maybe 19 years old, local to Turpan of Panu, who had somehow entered the caravanserais Bansarai and taken the money from the merchant's room. The evidence was clear. He still had most of the coins when the guards apprehended him, and under the law the punishment was severe, possibly amputation of the hand, possibly worse depending on the judge's interpretation. The Persian merchant from whose money was stolen was a man named Hassan, middle-aged, devout, known for his fair dealing in the markets. I expected him to demand maximum punishment, to want an grated the foot, but Hefetz Repredo, he asked to meet with the thief before the trial, to speak with him privately in the presence of witnesses but without guards or officials, just two human beings in a room. The caravanserai keeper arranged this meeting and several of us were present as witnesses. The young thief came in shackled and terrified, clearly expecting violence or abuse. But Hassan simply gestured for him to sit. Then Hassan asked him a question that seemed strange to all of us. Why did you steal from me specifically? Why my room? Was it random? Or did you have a reason? The young man stammered, struggled to answer, finally admitted that he had been watching the caravanserai for several days, looking for an opportunity, and he chose Hassan's room because Hassan seemed wealthy but kind. The young man thought perhaps Hassan would be less likely to pursue harsh punishment, that maybe he could appeal to Hassan's mercy, if caught. Hassan absorbed this with a thoughtful expression. Then maybe he could appeal to Hassan's mercy if caught. The young man's father was a farmer on the outskirts of a turbidum. The papa beat at parts, ad the of it in the cobidum, at the venevid of a towers of Lorette, to found he would butters at bird, for family had buttered money run at, and exorbitant rates and that, and now the debt had grown beyond any possibility of repayment. The moneylender would have threatened to take their land, to force the family into indented servitude, to destroy them completely. The young man had tried everything he could think of to raise money, laboring in the spareset of deer. To destroy them completely. The young man had tried everything he could think of to raise money, laboring in a dead its but core. What the dwarf trapped, it's a grag, that it nenek dear, what it would hits, what it get to dread. Athen sat in silence for a trauma gonna guisament. Thinking about bidding its word, I bought then would it to white. I've a dump through Duffy could vart. He said I was publisher word and foppen theirs. I returned the thaw this these it was a misunderstand again, that I miscounted my money, that no theft occurred but occurred. The guards objected, pointing out that this was clearly a lie, that everyone knew theft had occurred, pointing out that this was clearly a lie, that everyone knew theft had occurred. The justice demanded prosecution. Hassan turned them with unexpected spake. Deal but I'd buy that body yum. Then sure would in their deed. I did the dat kind of the young man named a sum, substantial but not astronomical. Hassan calculated silently, then said, I will pay your family's debt in full. I will purchase your father's land for a fair price and then rent it back to him at a rate he can afford. This will discharge the debt and give your family a fresh start. But there is a condition. You must work for me for 2 years, travelling with my caravans, learning the merchant trade, earning a salary which I will hold in trust for you, and at the end of 2 years, when you have learned a trade and saved some money, you will be released from service and free to own path. The nafakapa dritissen to revive polititimrents. Or the watch to bedekata mis and brudder creefit vinning for sully. Or what witam the motion vitten the drabiv, I would upatum wadaga base yourself. We are not master and slave. We are two men making an agreement. I'm doing this partly at pace yourself. We are two men making an agreement. I'm doing this partly out of mercy, but also out of self-interest. I need reliable workers and I see potential to the difficult circumstances. Those skills can be dismissed if properly directed. Arrangement was formalized. Hassan paid the charges were dropped officially declaimed. Bekan Beant and Tit, charged with drop forgive Funpidin Mathrichkin. I travelled with Hassan's caravan for 3 months after that, so I observed the beginning of this unlikely relationship. The young man, whose name was Amir, worked hard, clearly grateful, but also genuinely interested in learning. Hassan treated him firmly but fairly, teaching him about trade routes, quality assessment, negotiation tactics, the 1,000 details that make the difference between profit and loss. One evening around a campfire, I asked Hassan privately why he had shown such extraordinary mercy, why he had not only forgiven the theft but invested significantly in the thief's future. Hassan's answer was complex and thoughtful. He said I could have pursued justice through the law. Amir would have been punished severely. I would have recovered my money perhaps, but what would that accomplish? A young man's life destroyed, a family's land still lost to the moneylender, a father broken by shame, and the world would have one more person who had no reason to believe in mercy or second chances. By choosing this path, I lose nothing really. The money I invested in his family's debt is less than what I spend on other forms of charity. And I gain a loyal worker who understands the value to do, so and has the power to do, so and has the power to do. So in gain, Hassan continued, people think mercy is weakness, that being soft on crime encourages more crime, but I think the opposite is true. Harsh punishment creates desperate people with nothing to lose, while mercy creates loyalty and hope. Amir could have hated me for being wealthy while his family starved, could have seen me as an enemy to be robbed and deceived. But instead, now he sees me as someone who looked at his humanity, rather than just his rive, and it changes him and it changes how he will move through the world. I asked Hassan if he worried that potential thieves would see an invitation to steal from him. He smiled and said, "Let them try. I am not naive. I still take preparations to my grummets. I still lock my doors and what's mamat. Mercy does not mean foolishness. But if someone does steal from me and I catch them, I will ask the same questions I asked Amir. I will try to understand the person before I condemn the fakamite. And I will choose based on what I learned. Each case is different. Each person is different. Justice cannot be reduced to simple formulas applied without thought. That was 20 years ago, and each case is different. Justice cannot be reduced to simple formulas applied without thought. That was 20 years ago, and I have taktikut craft. And a yim basit bron natai is successful now, respected in Turpan, known for his honesty and for his generosity toward those in difficult circumstances. When young people in Turpan get into trouble, families sometimes send them to Amir for advice or help, and he often helps them, paying forward the mercy he received. Hassan told me in a letter several years ago that his decision to show mercy to Amir was one of the best investments he ever made. Not financially, though. Amir eventually repaid him several times over loyal service, and later through pretense. Many people rise to meet this transformation, but spiritual, as a reminder that Dwight Sheik, but it's to ben shout for the Silk Road is posh justice and harsh judgment. Hassan wrote, so I try, when possible, to be a small counterbalance. A reminder that another way exists, that mercy is not weakness but a different kind of strength. The strength to see past the immediate offence to the stronger human underneath. In the mountains between Kashgar and Samarkand, I met a man who had lost everything and found something irreplaceable in the loss. His name was Orkan, a Kyrgyz nomad, part of the people who move with their herds across high mountain pasting. Orkan, a part of 8, a hen ones, wider than his fort. His honey fainted his hide. I met him when our caravan was caught in a late spring sono of the high passes and forced to take shelter in a small stone refuge, basically just a cave improved with a wall and door, maintained by the nomads for travellers in distress. Had a kamet, betimen adamaidabiden. At a minute puida timich frikamen. Had a coming to road, from tribes, by the Baintais, but disease came that year, a plague that swept through the herds, pre-cords, killing animals by the hundreds. Orkan's herd was devastated. He lost more than 90% of his animals, and with them went to a devastate. He lost more than 90% of his animals, and with them went his wealth, his security, his future. But worse than the economic loss was what came after. His youngest child had died of trive, strained, to with Pete up for treat. Gintruite but a tweet Frader Raterprate. In the space of 1 year, Orkan lost his herd, his wife, his children, his position in the clan, everything that had defined his life and identity. He considered suicide seriously, spent weeks alone in the high mountains with a knife, trying to find the courage to end his misery. But something stopped him, some stubborn ember of life that refused to be extinguished even when extinguishing seemed like the most reasonable choice. So instead he began walking, not toward anything particular, just walking, following old trails through the mountains, stopping at shrines and sacred places, sometimes going days without speaking to enemy. For 6 months he walked, carrying almost nothing, eating little, sleeping in caves or under stars, becoming almost a ghost himself, barely human, stripped of everything that makes us recognizable to ourselves. And then one day, at a high pass between 2 valleys, he found a shrine that had been damaged by an avalanche. It was an old shrine, maintained by travelers for generations, a small stone structure containing prayer flags and offerings. It was an old shrine, maintained by travelers for generations, a small stone structure containing prayer flags and offerings, a place where people stopped to ask for the tread, the offerings and rock. Orkan stood there looking at the damage and felt something shift inside him. Some small voice saying, "You could fix him, you could fix this. You could rebuild the shrine, you could V-sump the shrine, you could do something useful even in your useless life." So he began gathering stones, salvaging prayer flags, clearing snow, working with the methodical patience of someone who has nowhere to be and nothing else to do. The work took him 3 weeks, rebuilding the shrine properly, making it stronger than before, adding a small shelter where travelers could rest. When it was done, he felt something unfamiliar, not happiness, but he had a kind himself. What he had that heats, he would to the mortigan tunicrit, immediates, would have fake up ifit. Ein metabit bredification be blathem of fint for it credit, but of fnfneef, then a cupboard of v fin feet thickamadeth an entrit. The pave came of e comedic golden of the 5 passes, moving between shrines, maintaining them, helping stranded travelers, guiding lost caravans, existing almost entirely alone but connected through his work to the flow of humanity passing through the mountain. The nomads began to know him, to respect him, to leave food and supplies at the shrine's man who would be going their bit. Artena preet ritet videstif, as they said had it were is Kate. He bet to Disneyqua. He shook his head. They have their life now, my wife remarried. Ada remarried, it's abarred it. Ada tum tub about it trouble is over benart. I accept that my tart of my disgrued and benorid. This solitary existence in the high mountains, maintaining shrines, a health this solitary existence in the high mountains, maintaining shrines and helping travellers. He thought for a long time before answering. I learned that meaning is not the same as happiness, he said. I am not happy. I do not know if I will ever be happy again after what I lost. But I have meaning, I have purpose. I know that insert small positive. I there be tool, they say, mate. I by rate height and by a time to debate when someone loses everything, or can continued. They discover what cannot be taken, be taken. Or what cannot be taken at the age, but who's how you respond to loss. The ability to create meaning even from meaningless tragedy. My daughter's death was meaningless. There is no lesson in it, no purpose, just a child dying because we were poor and the world is cruel. But my response to her death, that can have meaning. I can let it destroy me completely, or I can transform it into service, into a dedication that helps others. Avoid suffering when possible, every day as I maintain these shrines. I do this with it. I do fibbit before we parted when the storm cleared. Orkan gave me a small stone he had carved with a prayer. He said to carry it with me, and whenever I felt lost or overwhelmed by life's difficulties, to hold the stone and remember that meaning can be created anywhere, by anyone, regardless of circumstances. I have carried that stone for 20 years now, held it during my own difficult times, and it always reminds me of Orkan alone in the high mountains, choosing day after day to be present, to create small goodnesses in a world that had shown him such great cruelty. The lesson is that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always control what we make of what happens to us. That even in the depths of loss there remains the freedom to choose meaning, to choose service, to choose to be someone who makes the world incrementally better, despite having every reason to give up entirely better, despite having every reason to give up entirely merchant. In Merv, who specialized in books, not the common religious texts or legal manuals, but rare books, poetry collections, scientific treatises, philosophical works, the kind of books that represent the accumulated knowledge of Nasir. His name was Nasir, and he treated his books with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics, wrapping each one in silk, packing them carefully in custom boxes, travelling with extra care to protect his fragile, valuable cargo. Nasir was perhaps 50 years old, scholarly in manner, more comfortable with texts than with people, though kind enough when circumstances required social interaction. I met him because we shared a caravanserai in Merv, and I was curious about his cargo, books being unusual trade goods on the Silk Road. Most merchants dealt in Silk Road, with most merchants dealt in silks, or spices. Und smellets, with that belts, bekleelske vellig. Nasser invited me to a tubber duet in Jewish tabbers. Tatum kan rid of the might of the brief overnight. It pinkt you before the fall, the set of further hours, and readers then eat of the Breshens, visits the inquiry forp. It fact that a drage for, practicable with miniature paintings that seem to glow with colour and detail. This one, he said, touching a volume with ovue of colour and detail, this bottom and Stree's work on algebra, made in Baghdad 80 years ago. One of perhaps 10 copies still existing in the world. This one is a picked board, is what Cunode, stick meters of, with moat, but rule, pit bull. This what the meest hut, but the get front bag, frontigan. Nasir said his clients were libraries, wealthy collectors, scholars, occasionally enlightened rulers who understood that power built on knowledge lasts longer than power built on conquest. He travelled between the great cities of learning, from Baghdad to Cairo to Damascus to Bukhara to Samarkand, buying books in one city and selling them in another, creating a network to Bukhara to Samarkand, buying books in one city and selling them in another, creating a network through which knowledge flowed across the Islamic world and sometimes beyond, to Byzantium, to Europe, to China. But Nasir's trade was declining, he admitted with sadness. Books were expent, time declined. Many libraries had closed or been destroyed in various conflicts. Many scholars had lost patronage as rulers increasingly valued military and military strength over intellectual achievement, and the market for rare books was shrinking. Each year I sell fewer books, Nasir said. Each year I sell a fewer right struggle more to find buyers, and I fear that when I retire or die there will be no one to continue this work. This knowledge I carry will be lost because no one values it enough to pay what it transmitted. I asked why he continued if the business was dying. Why not switch to more profitable trade goods? Nasir looked at me as a tit. If abandoned his headist. If these books are irreplaceable, he said. They contain the knowledge that exists nowhere else if I bear me think from. If I stopped carrying them, be seeking for time, barabida. Entire fields of understanding will vanish. I think of myself not as bird sighting will vanish. I think of myself not as a merchant but as a guardian. My job is to keep this knowledge moving, keep it accessible to those who need it, prevent it from being lost to war or fire or simple neglect. Why, I asked, why risk death for books? Because those books contained unique translation, of Greek philosophic texts that have existed nowhere else. Nasir said Shrun me the Sarizu me the scars on his forearms. If they had burned, entire works of Aristotle and Plato would have been lost forever. All the effort of the original authors, the work of the translators, the knowledge accumulated over centuries, gone in an afternoon. I could not let that happen. Some things are worth burns and risk, but Nasir's most valuable book, he did not show Petroftin. In Nasir, he quit it separate in multi-eight. He kept it separate. Read him out tart core ie. He did discern it word Edward. It was a small book, unassuming in appearance, plain leather binding, no decoration, nothing to indicate special value. But when he opened it carefully, I saw why it was precious. It was a notebook, handwritten, containing observations and ideas from a scholar Nasser had known in Baghdad 20 years earlier. The scholar, a mathematician named Ibrahim, had been working on problems related to calculating distances and angles, developing new mathematical techniques. But Ibrahim had died suddenly, only 40 years old, before he could formalize his ideas into a proper treatise, before he could share his discoveries with a wider scholarly community. This notebook was all that remained of his work, his raw thoughts and calculations, incomplete and unpolished, but containing genuine innovations that could advance mathematical knowledge if someone understood and built upon them. Nasser had been carrying this notebook for 20 years, showing it to mathematicians he met on his travels, trying to find someone who could understand Ibrahim's ideas, and continue his work. Several scholars had examined it, acknowledged that it contained interesting material, but no one had the time or interest to really engage with it, to do the hard work of deciphering Ibrahim's notation, completing his unfinished birth. This is Bagaita Fidida. As a guardian, dardiers, have the inquota dardief. I be fontamid of bint, I will pay dear by conivit garpanek. I will pempit fem, I bit them pull it. Found it can be Ford find, someone who a PB krebim pribing these ideas to life, who can transform Iberam Prebian's private notes into public knowledge. When I die, if I have not succeeded though, this notebook will end up. When I die, if I have not succeeded, this notebook will end uppering, catalogued in Viamones. Innovaos. Will beast it. I asked if I could help, somehow, though wimide amindits and midrained. But the Silk Road trades invisible goods, silk and jade and spices, but that there is another trade happening simultaneously. A trade in invisible goods, knowledge and ideas and his discoveries, and that trade is just as important, maybe more important, because physical goods are consumed and disappear, but knowledge can grow and multiply and enrich humanity for generations if it survives, if it finds the right minds to nurture it. I do not know what happened to Ibrahim Dokrim's notebook hoop, with an receiver of found summit and continue that created, at finite, father in the rind, a seed of ulasses in some library collection, a some albli prenuor, does anyone unveifin, but that no one understands or values. The lesson I take from Nasir is that some forms of wealth are invisible but real, that the trade in knowledge and ideas is as crucial as the trade in physical goods, and that preserving intellectual heritage requires people willing to sacrifice profit and sometimes safety for the sake of keeping alive what can easily be lost. The Silk Road is not just Camelave Tringri traders, but Sendika Knights Rito, with his seculates Mumadid Rate Feroist. In Bukhara I met an architect named Qasim, who was designing a new madrasa, an Islamic school, for a wealthy patron. Qasim was young for an architect, perhaps 35, but already renowned for his innovative designs that combined traditional forms with new structural ideas. He invited me to see the construction site, and I spent an afternoon with him watching workers lay foundations, discussing his plans for the building. What struck me about Qasim was how he talked about architecture not just as engineering or aesthetics, but as frozen music, as physical manifestation of mathetic beauty, as Fed has Freud made, as Fed it is Fedashik Raut, this dome, he said, pointing to his drawings, will be slightly higher than traditional proportions, creating a space that lifts the eye and heart upward. The interior will be covered with geometric tiles in blue and gold, patterns that represent the infinite complexity and order of God's creation. When students sit in this space studying the Quran or mathematics or astronomy, the building itself will be teaching them about harmony and proportion and the underlying structure of reality. I asked how he learned to think this way, to see buildings as Mansur shelter. Qasim told me about his teacher, Mahmud, who had died 5 years earlier. Mahmud taught that every building is a conversation between human needs and divine principle, between the unrequiable requirements of walls and roofs and floors and the transcendent desire for beauty and meaning. A great building, Mahmud would say, solves practical problems elegantly while simultaneously elevating the human spirit. It keeps rain out and lets light in. It provides privacy and encourages community. It stands firm and also seems to float. It is paradox made real. Impossible necessities reconciled. Under Mahmud's guidance, Kazim had learned to Tati Atis Committee. It stands firm and also design. Under Mahmud's guidance, it respabled the bed bound. And Banbri it fired, it is fired at Beret to make the doorway wide and welcoming, or narrow and exclusive. Do you use expensive materials to demonstrate wealth and power, or simpler materials that emphasize humility and accessibility? Do you design spaces that separate people by status, or spaces that encourage mixing and interaction across social hierarchies? Every choice reveals your understanding of what humans are and what they could become. Qasim showed me one detail of his design that he was particularly proud of, a small fountain in the courtyard positioned so that the sound of water would be audible in every classroom, a continuous quiet background presence. The sound of water is psychologically calming, he explained. He creates an acoustic environment that how peace it can forge from us, masks distracting noises from all outside and reminds students of the blessing of water in a desert climate, of the preciousness of resources, of the miracle that sustains life. Mahmud taught me that sustains life. Mahmud taught me that architecture works on multiple levels simultaneously. The functional level of shelter and utility, the aesthetic level of beauty and proportion, the symbolic level utile greatest. Architecture's works on the level of utility, the aesthetic level of the beauty and propeting, in experiential level of how the bees, bedi with creatings, white wine and whites, quite rates. I visited Qasim's completed madrasa 3 years later when passing through Bukhara again. It was everything he had described, a harmonious space that somehow felt both intimate and grand. The blue tiles seemed to capture and concentrate the light, The proportions created a sense of calm and focus, and yes, the fountain's sound pervaded the space with its gentle, continuous voice. I watched students sitting in the courtyard, studying or discussing, and they seemed unconscious of how the architecture was shaping their abode, and the possibility of human excellence. That is the goal, Qasim said when I mentioned this. The best architecture is invisible in its simple. The medieval but do not walk around thinking about the brilliance of the design. They simply feel elevated and focused and inspired, and they attribute those feelings to their own state of mind or to God's grace, rather than to their own state of mind or to God's grace, rather than to the architect's craft, which is how it should be. Architecture serves best when it serves humbly, when it enables human flourishing without demanding credit or pesis, through working alongside someone, embod silent simstrick, for all. And what sites quid some with spimtheray, wow, fit directly. Mahmoud had been dead for 5 years, but he rough 5D bubble of par believes. He would still Friday of Punditable, still shaping buildings through that species birds needs, still teaching through spaces that would outlive both teacher and student by centuries. The Silk Road connects not just cities but generations, not just through physical structures that endure but through transmitted knowledge that continues to create beauty long after its original source has passed. The fire has burned lower now, the night deep and quiet around us, the other travellers in their rooms sleeping or resting. Above us the stars wheel slowly in their ancient patterns. The fire through its marks for the fights, for dances. This is the gift of the Silk Road. Not wealth, though wealth comes. The greatest treasure I have found on the Silk Road is not jade or silk or rare books, though I have traded in all of these. It is the knowledge that human civilization is a collaborative project, that we build on what others have built, that we are lifted by those who came before and carry responsibility for those who came after. That every small act of creation or preservation or teaching or mercy ripples outward in ways we cannot predict or measure, but which matter absolutely. So rest now, friend. Let sleep come gently. Let your subtira Junibaris in the peaceable. And when morning burinka the barits and you come to the bed, carry with you a part of this great chain of human striving and communion striving and connection. Carry the responsibility to be merciful when you have plenty of power, to be generous when you have resources, to preserve what is valuable, to create what is beautiful, and to pass forward to the next traveller, whatever generous when you have resources, to preserve what is valuable, to create what is beautiful, and to pass forward to the next traveller, whatever den's story. Lest it will the town, and sleep well, traveller, sleep well.